Yeah, so I just wanted to point out a few things in regards to the MOD2 test. Here on the screen you can see the debrief form, or is actually where the examiner debriefs you, gives you a report once you complete your test, whether you fail it or not. And this form you can actually download it from the internet. It's one of the, I mean, if you Google it, you're definitely gonna find it. Just Google this this reference here. And I just wanted to, even though they explain at the back, for some reason it just took me a bit of a kind of reading it a few times to understand how the marking actually works. So I wanted to explain it myself to you, just in case you have that same issue. So S here stands for serious fault, D stands for dangerous fault, and then everything else is minor faults. So for example, if the examiner, as it was in my case, where I had an issue whereby I was riding with a higher speed than the speed limit would allow, yeah, it's not actually in this section, so let's just assume that this is speed, right? Because it looks exactly the same. So what the examiner did, the way they mark it, they put a line across the relevant criteria. So for example, say I say the examiner here would have put a cross like that. If I did the same mistake again, he would put another cross, and so on. But these, because they are in this section, they would be classed as minor faults. Obviously, if you accumulate too many of those, they could be converted into a serious or dangerous fault. And one thing to bear in mind is that whenever you do either one of the serious or dangerous faults, then you basically fail the test. But one thing I do want to flag is the fact that for most criteria, apart from the eyesight test, which is basically they ask you to read a reg number at 20 or 25 meters distance away, something like that. So this is the only one that if you don't pass, there's no option for minor or dangerous as a dangerous fault. It's a serious fault, right? So if you don't pass that one, you fail the test instantly. All the other criteria, it will be at the discretion of the examiner. So even if you don't do your checks, he could class it, depending on the situation, as a minor fault, or he could class it as a serious, or he could class it as a dangerous fault. So the point is, you really will be at the discretion of the examiner whether you pass it or not. So yeah, just something to flag how the criteria for passing or failing actually works, and give you that kind of extra understanding of the report, of the form that the examiner fills in once you completed your test. Lastly, I just wanted to mention what are the major faults considered by the examiner, and maybe even talk a little bit about them. So for example, when it comes to the failing the eyesight test, as I mentioned, this is eliminatory, because you do the eye test just before you get on the bike, so you don't even get to start the test itself if you don't pass the eyesight test. The second one, not having the correct documentation, so make sure that you have all the documentation with you. Failing to do so, again, you don't even get to sit on the bike, so it's an instant fail. So the documents that you will need is your driving license. You will also need your MOD1 pass certificate, the theory test pass, and your CBT certificate. So 4 documents. So failing to show any of those is an instant fail. Now, failing to cancel a false indication, so that I guess implies that you could potentially give the wrong signal. This actually happened to me on the test when I did the MOD2, but that was simply because I I just misunderstood via radio what the examiner said. So he told me to turn right, and for some reason I just misunderstood it. I thought we were meant to turn left, so I started my left indicator, and then he drew my attention to it once again, and that actually gave me a minus on the test. What I should have done is actually carry on left, and this is what you should do, because they can't give you a minor, or they can't point out as a fault the fact that you that you turn left whereas you are supposed to turn right, assuming that the indication was correct. Same applies to, for example, roundabouts and turns in general when you're doing the test. If you are in the wrong lane, do not change at the last minute. Just carry on as correctly, riding correctly, and they can't give you a minor, or they can't fault you for that, because at the end of the day you rode correctly. They can't give you a fault if you misunderstand directions. No way that can happen. So just keep that in mind. Then the failing to carry out necessary lifesavers, that is a big one. They are called lifesavers for a reason. You need to do them. I've heard of people not necessarily failing, but is considered, you're definitely gonna make the examiner want to fail you. You know, it's a lifesaver for a reason. You could, if you don't do your checks properly and in good timing, you're doomed to fail. Actions that can cause another vehicle to brake or to swerve. So yeah, again, I had that problem on my test. It's a tricky one, because in my case, for instance, I believe that the vehicle, one of the vehicles that was actually coming towards me on his own lane, he got overcautious for no reason whatsoever, I think, and just because he reduced speed, he did not necessarily brake to the point of stopping the car. He just reduced his speed. That caused me to fail the test. So again, be very mindful of that. Using the wrong lane, again, as I mentioned earlier, if you are in the wrong lane, carry on correctly, even if that means taking a turn that the examiner does not want you to turn, you know. So if he tells you to turn left and you are on the lane to turn right, don't change at the last minute, just turn right, and what the examiner is going to do is give you new directions. But don't change lane at the last minute. Again, same applies to indicators. If you are roundabout or whatever, and your indicator is for left, and you are assuming you are in the correct lane, if the examiner wants you to turn right, if you can't change lane in good timing, and you most likely won't, just turn left. And the examiner is gonna follow you. Eventually, is gonna ask you to stop, to pull over, and will give you new directions. They won't fail you for not taking the correct directions, but they will fail you if you don't ride legally, or if you put yourself in danger or other road users in danger. Lastly, failing to stop for pedestrians on a zebra crossing. Well, I would say they will fail you if you fail to stop for pedestrians, full stop, whether it's a zebra crossing or how is it called, the other ones, any crossing, any pedestrian crossing. I actually can't remember the names. Failing to stop at a red traffic light obviously is a big one, so you don't want to do that at all. Red light, stop. Another thing that I would say, and it is something actually that I do when I ride, especially just to give me that kind of good habit, when just to make sure that I prepare myself correctly for passing the test, is even when you really need to, I really try to look ahead quite a lot when it comes to traffic lights. And if the traffic light is green, I will not breeze through it. I will reduce my speed a little bit, just in case that green light turns into amber, because the last thing I would personally want to do is cross the junction when the lights turn amber, because the examiner then might say that I was just cruising at too high speed, to the point where I didn't allow myself to stop in good timing. Again, the amber light is not the kind of indication that is, oh, I can just make it through the crossing, through the junction. You are meant to actually stop at the amber light. Yeah, this is according to the high code, you know. So be mindful of that as well. I just wanted to say thank you for watching, thank you for listening. If you think this content could be useful to others like you, please share. Additionally, you could also subscribe to my channel, and see you next time.